It was my 6th birthday and my party had just ended. We had cake, pizza, and played games. A typical American birthday party. I lived with my mom and her boyfriend. His name was Steve. For my birthday, they got me one of those plastic Fisher-Price play sets. The ones that were like 4 feet tall and had a small slide, small enough to fit in my room. I was extremely excited about this because it was exactly what I wanted, and I was sure it was the greatest invention since sliced bread. The playset was set up right by my door in front of my bed. Now, before I go into the actual part of the story I want you to listen to, I need to give a little background about the house I lived in, from what I know at least. To begin with, the house was an old, blue, colonial house in upstate New York. The house was like every other house in the neighborhood, and since Steve had just gotten a promotion at work, there was constantly work being done on the house. Basically, a complete remodel while we lived there. The only thing I didn't like about the house was that you couldn't get into the attic, and for some reason bats kept getting in there, and at 6 years old, you don't like bats. My mom tucked me into bed after my birthday at about 9 p.m., a little later than usual. I remember waking up a few times that night because I was really excited to use that playset in the morning. I didn't get to play with it much that day because of the assembly. One of the times I woke up, I remember looking at the playset when I saw 2 shadows. A boy and a girl. And they looked like they were talking to each other. As a child, I didn't want to be scared, so I rationalized that this was the shadows of the trees playing tricks on my mind. That's what my mom would have said. I managed to go back to sleep that night and didn't really think much of it the next day. My birthday is in June, so I usually don't have class. This meant I could spend the day playing with my friends. I didn't think about the shadows I saw the night before at all. I basically forgot that it happened until the next night. Usually, bedtime was 8 p.m., and my mom was pretty strict on this matter, so I was showered, in my pajamas, and in bed by then. I was laying in bed when I had a strong feeling something was watching me. I looked to the wall between my door and the playset, and the shadows were there again. This time, I paid more attention to it while I was frozen in fear in my bed. The shadow children seemed to be talking, but I still couldn't hear them. It also seemed as if they were looking at each other, but it's hard to sense 3D direction from a 2D shadow. I screamed for my mom, and she ran into the room and turned on the light. At this point, the shadows disappeared. My mom then let me sleep in her bed that night, which she never let me do. She assumed I had a nightmare. Every night from then on, when I would look at the wall at night, those shadows would be there. When this would happen, I would call for my mom, and the cycle repeated. During this time, Steve and my mom would argue a lot. I wasn't sure why, but I know I didn't notice it at first. The house had also gone into a full remodeling where almost half of the house would always have something being done to it. I wished for school. This was back when school was fun and all your friends would be there. I hated spending any time in that house, and I would try to go to my grandma's whenever possible. This cycle repeated for a while, and I'm not really sure what my mom thought about me telling her that ghost shadow people were in my room every night. I begged her to leave the hallway light on every night, hoping that the light would scare away the shadows. She obliged, but the light never did anything. I would yell for her every night. This continued for a while, but then one night, something changed. Lying in bed, something felt different. I wasn't sure if I had built up a sort of tolerance for the shadow people that were in my room at night, in the same place, doing nothing but silently talking to each other. Or if I was just dumb. That night, I decided that I didn't want to wake up my mom for some reason. I decided I would be brave enough to walk right past the shadows to my mom's room. I think it might be important to remember that whenever my mom would come by, these shadows would disappear. I still don't know why. I walked past the shadows and nothing happened. I was then in the hallway when the light was right above me, and my mom's room was to my left. I remember looking up at the light, then back to my mom's room, then back to the light. I did this a few times, and then I remember just staring into the light. I'm not sure why, but I was drawn to it. This is where the story starts to get a little confusing, but I will try my best to explain to you what I can. This next part of the story will be what I can remember as of today, then I will try to fill in some blanks with what my family remembers and could tell me. After looking at the light, for some reason I decided that I didn't want to wake up my mom, which was weird because I never cared before. I went back to bed, and the next thing I remember is sitting in the living room watching TV. There was construction all around me, and plastic covers on the couches so that none of the drywall or new paint got on them. I remember I was sitting on the floor and I was watching static on the TV. To me, this memory seems like an out-of-body experience. I feel like I was there, but didn't feel in control. These memories are like a flash to me. I have them, but nothing in between. I only have one more memory being in that house. I was in my room, looking out of the window and into the driveway. It was nighttime, and my mom had asked her friend's mother to come over. Her name was Danielle, but everyone called her Dee. I remember watching her pull up into the driveway and giving my mom a hug. I could hear them for some reason, and this also seemed like an out-of-body experience. I heard Dee say that there was a boy and a girl spirit in the house, but they weren't the problem. The problem was that there was a dark and evil entity in the house, and that it wanted me. Dee and my mom then proceeded to burn sage in the house. I assumed I went to bed, but when I woke up, I was at my grandma's house, and it was 2 months after the light incident. I felt fine when I woke up, and I don't think I even noticed anything different. I often spent the night at my grandma's house. I had my own assumptions about what happened, but I never really talked to my mom about it until I was 16. When I woke up at my grandma's, my mom had told me that they were moving out of Steve's house, and that they were breaking up, and that I wouldn't be going back. Like, ever. My mom would get my stuff. As I stated earlier, I talked to my mom about this in detail when I was 16. The memories had bothered me for so long that I wanted answers. I told my mom the exact story that is written above. My mom gave me a confused look, but when I told her about the part with Dee, she told me I wasn't in the house. My mom proceeded to tell me how I became more and more distant as we lived in that house. Then one day we were eating dinner and I just passed out. My head was in my plate and everything, like out of a movie. My mom said I had a high fever and looked ill. My mom is the kind of person who believes in the supernatural, and I think when I passed out, she decided to accept that the ghost stories I was telling weren't in my head. This is when she decided to call Dee, who was known around town as being psychic. Dee told my mom to immediately get me out of the house and that she would come over. My mom drove me to my grandmother's and went back to the house when Dee showed up. I wasn't in the house, but I was able to recall what Dee had done and said, without my mother telling me. My mother also told me that she didn't tell Dee anything about what I had said, just that I said something was here. Since I was sick, my grandma kept a close watch on me that night. My grandma doesn't really believe in ghosts, but when I talked to her about it, she said it was a weird night. She said I was making weird noises, having trouble sleeping, and had a high fever. Then it just stopped. Like one moment, all my symptoms went away. I went to bed, and that's when I remember waking up. As I sit here and read this story, I'm a 21-year-old senior in college. Every so often I think back to these events, and I'm just confused. I have no answers. I try to come up with my own conclusions, but I never think of a rational one. I have a hypothesis for what happened, but I won't share that with you now. I want you to come up with your own. Maybe someone else has gone through the same situation. That was the point of reading this story. I'm hoping that someday someone will read this and be able to help me. It would be easy to say I was possessed or something, but that seems too unreal. If the memories I have weren't so vivid, it would be hard for me to believe this story. Hell, it's hard to believe the memories, but I assure you, this did happen.